Hello, everyone at Estevão Lives. If you like the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.
This USAID thing that's going on, Mike Benz has been on that like a pit bull, and I've been following him on X, and he's going to come back on here and kind of explain everything. But he explained it the last time he was here, and I don't think I really grasped it until Elon's 6 wizards. He brought in some young wizards to go in there and go over the books, and they are just finding crazy shit. It's great, and it's so interesting. I was listening to a left-wing podcast today. I like to mix it up. I listen to all kinds of different stuff, and it was like I was listening to a different world. Like, they weren't even talking about all of this corruption and all this obvious buying of influence. Instead, they were talking about aid overseas and how people are going to starve. And I'm like,
it's mind-boggling, and there's also, I have to say, I'm upset at the general pattern of a failure to recognize how right those of us who hypothesized that there was a racket that had overtaken our entire governance structure, we turn out to be absolutely right about this, and no one's going to mention it. That's mind-blowing.
It's very strange that the media is ignoring it, especially the left-wing media. It's just too big of a win for the right, and so they're just ignoring it. And then they're just highlighting the good things that USAID did, which I'm sure it probably did. Probably had to do some good things to at least justify its existence.
As a cover story, I'm not even sure. Maybe it doesn't change anything. Obviously, this was a mechanism used to funnel money to all sorts of things that we didn't vote on, that don't make sense in light of our constitutional structure. And I obviously have concerns like everybody else about where this train takes us, but seeing that structure broken up it's a huge relief.
They gave $27 million to the George Soros Prosecutor Fund. So our own government is funding this left-wing lunatic who is hiring the most insane prosecutors who are letting people out of jail who commit violent crimes.
And that's exactly how this racket worked, that the ability to tax the American public and then effectively get us to pay for being propagandized, for being surveilled, that's the game. And I don't know what era we currently live in. Obviously, there's a lot that's confusing about what the Trump administration is up to, but I don't think any reasonable person could be unhappy that we are exiting that era.
I'm going to read off some of the things that this guy, Kanakota the Great, on Twitter listed. And this is off the Jesse Water Show. USAID, $20 million for Iraqi Sesame Street, $2 million for Moroccan pottery classes, $11 million to tell Vietnam to stop burning trash, $27 million to give gift bags to illegals. $27 million. $330 million to help Afghanis grow crops. Crops. I wonder what those crops are. What's their biggest crop, Brett?
It's going to be the poppy seeds for bagels, I'm thinking.
$200 million on an unused Afghani dam. $250 million on an unused Afghani road. This is wild. I mean, some of this stuff is really, really crazy.
Well, yes, and, USAID is, of course, riddled through whatever international madness it is that caused us to open our southern border and facilitate an invasion through the Darien Gap.
I completely agree with Joe Rogan's perspective on the way USAID has been spending taxpayer money. In his video, Joe Rogan raises valid concerns about the absurdity of some of the projects funded by the agency. For example, when Joe Rogan highlights the $2 million spent on ceramic classes in Morocco or the $20 million used for a Sesame Street program in Iraq, it makes me question if these are the kinds of projects that truly make a difference in countries struggling with real economic and social issues.
Seeing that structure laid bare it almost feels like it can't be real. Like it can't
crazy.
have been this close to the surface, and yet here we are.
They were spending. Is this number correct? I think the number that I read was $600 million every 2 months to ship in illegals.
Sounds right. I don't know the number offhand, but
What the fuck?
well, you have to realize that basically we had a shadow apparatus functioning, and it involves all kinds of things. It involves payoffs to people who didn't deserve them. It involves contracting to entities that were necessary to get the work done. So I don't think we can properly understand what these numbers mean and what they're actually being used for, but it was a racket.
Well, we were always wondering, like, why is our debt so high? Why is the national debt so high? Like, why is our deficit so insane? Well, this is it. I mean, how about the one where they paid $236 billion, like, for chargers? Do you know that they were trying to set up chargers?
You mean car chargers? And they only built a couple of them?
Excuse me. $40 billion for electric car ports. 8 ports have been built. You know how crazy that is? $40 billion for car ports.
But I have to say, as much as this is shocking, I wasn't surprised. I thought that effectively our entire system had been turned into a racket and that we were basically being fed a cover story from it. And it's weird to now have the evidence of this, but I think it was apparent that whatever had taken over our system wasn't interested in the well-being of average people, that it was interested in the power of the state to take people's resources and redistribute them, and that really is what's been going on for most of our adult lives.
And it's also important to note that this progressive, left-leaning, like radical left arm of the government, of the country, was manufactured.
Yes.
It's all manufactured. It's all manufactured and supported. It's not organic, which is really fascinating about the other side, because the other side, the reaction to it is organic. Like, say what you want about the Trump administration and what you think about him. That was an organic shift where people were like, enough.
Yes, it was an overdue reaction.
Yeah.
The cover story that what we were up to was righting past wrongs was so pernicious and pervasive that it was hard to get our footing to challenge it.
Right.
But it shouldn't really be surprising that that movement wasn't organic. Of course it was induced. It was a cover story for theft. And we're going to be waking up to the magnitude of that theft for quite some time.
I think this is going to take years. Chamath said that it's going to be like Iran-Contra on steroids. That's what he said. He said when you get to the bottom of all this, it's going to be insane. Because they haven't even got to the Medicaid yet. They haven't even got to the medical stuff. There's so much they haven't even tapped into where they think the real motherload of fraud is.
Yes, and I must say that there is also another aspect to this which we have to be careful about, which is that the justifiable anger at discovering what it is that we've been dragged into as a nation is going to make it hard to see where the limits ought to be in terms of upending this stuff. In other words, at the moment, I'm cheering for the wrecking ball.
Right.
Break this stuff up.
Yeah.
Never again. But there are...
What's that, Jamie?
I was reading an article about the spending on the chargers. They said that they haven't actually, according to this, they haven't actually spent all that money yet.
Well, what do they do with it?
They've spent some of it to make some of those things, but it's just that hasn't been allocated yet. It's a long article going through all the spending that's been done. It's on factcheck.org.
Factcheck.org. Who runs that?
I don't know. Some of the chargers have been made. Some of them are on the way to be made, and they built 61 at 15 stations since mid-August, or through mid-August. 14,900 more are currently in some stage of development. But that's where it goes into like where they are, what they have to be done, and who's getting the money from them. It has to be done through a long process from each state.
Yeah, the question is, how can we get a proper accounting? As you point
Right.
out, who the hell is factcheck.org?
Well, that's the problem with fact-checking organizations. That should really be illegal.
Yes.
Like, I think if you're a fact-checking organization, we should have stringent rules on what influence is being peddled. Like, who's paying for these fact-checkers? Who's behind the scenes? What is the it should be very transparent. How did you determine whether or not this was true or false? You know, because there are a lot of things that get said. Like, I don't know if you saw this, but Elizabeth Warren got confronted, and it's on Twitter this morning. She got confronted about the amount of money that she's received from pharmaceutical drug companies. She said she's never received any money from pharmaceutical drug companies and never received any monies from any PACs. Yeah. And then, of course, underneath it, Community Notes strikes again. And, of course, she received millions.
Yeah.
She's a fucking liar.
Well, and it's an arms race.
Yeah.
How can pharma cloak the money that it's giving so that there's plausible deniability at the point that Elizabeth Warren is?
Joe Rogan is absolutely right to point out how strange it is that the USAID would send Ukrainians to Paris Fashion Week or allocate millions of dollars to promote tourism in Lebanon. These examples seem disconnected from the actual needs of these countries. Joe Rogan emphasizes that when we look at the big picture, the USAID's funding priorities seem out of touch with reality, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. Joe Rogan also brings up the issue of diversity and inclusion programs, such as the $1.5 million spent on DEI in Serbia and $45 million for DEI scholarships in Myanmar. While diversity is important, it seems misplaced to be using U.S. taxpayer dollars for these initiatives in countries where basic infrastructure and healthcare should be the priority. Joe Rogan is spot on when he questions whether these programs actually benefit the people who need it most. Furthermore, Joe Rogan's point about failed infrastructure investments is hard to ignore. The $300 million spent on diesel plants in Afghanistan that were never used, or the $250 million spent on a road that never saw traffic, are perfect examples of how mismanaged USAID's funding can be. Joe Rogan's frustration with the inefficiency of these projects is justified, and I find myself agreeing with every word he says on this issue.